The slap echoed the coastal kitchen like a gunshot, silencing every conversation in the packed restaurant. Plates froze midair, forks halted, and eyes turned. Danielle sat frozen, her hand clutching her stinging cheek where her wedding ring should have been a symbol of love, not pain. She tried to comprehend what had just happened, but the shock felt heavier than the silence itself. Before I continue, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, because what you're about to witness is deeper than you think. Danielle had walked into the elegant coastal kitchen, glowing with expectancy. The ocean shimmered just beyond the tall glass windows, waves colliding against the shore like a silent orchestra. 8 months pregnant, she wore a soft blue dress that flowed gently over her belly, framing the miracle of life she carried. Every step she took radiated grace, every smile she offered carried the warmth of a woman who believed in the power of love. Tonight was meant to be another memory in a journey she thought was unshakable. At her side was Jonathan Parker, her husband, her supposed protector, the CEO who wore power like a second skin. He had promised her the world, whispered vows of forever, and built a home where she thought her heart could rest. But what she didn't know was that the man who had given her dreams would, in one cruel moment, destroy them in front of strangers. The restaurant buzzed with laughter and chatter, crystal glasses clinking, and waiters gliding gracefully between tables. Danielle and Jonathan sat by the window, their table adorned with white roses and gleaming silverware. To anyone watching, they were the perfect couple: wealth, love, and the anticipation of new life. But beneath the surface, storms were brewing. They whispered over the menu, Jonathan's voice low and sharp, not the tender tone of a husband, but the clipped words of a man irritated, impatient. Danielle tried to ease the tension, her hand brushing the tablecloth nervously, her lips curving into a fragile smile. But Jonathan's eyes burned cold. Then it happened, sudden, violent, and unforgiving. His hand cut through the air like a whip, striking her cheek with cruelty no heart should know. The sound cracked louder than a wine glass dropped on marble, echoing through the elegant hall. Time seemed to fracture. The sea outside still moved in rhythm, but inside the restaurant, silence swallowed everything. Gasps rippled through the room like a wave. Strangers froze in disbelief, forks halted midair, and conversations died instantly. Waiters stumbled with trays, their steps unsure, caught between duty and shock. Couples exchanged horrified glances, mothers shielded their children's eyes, and some dared to lift their phones, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Danielle's eyes filled with tears, not from the sting of the slap, though her cheek burned hot and red, but from something far heavier. The betrayal, the humiliation, the brutal shattering of trust in a place where love was supposed to thrive. She wasn't just a wife enduring cruelty. She was a mother carrying the child of a man who had just destroyed her dignity before the world. Her hand rose instinctively, fingers trembling as they pressed against the mark on her skin. The ring on her finger, the symbol of vows made and promises spoken, suddenly felt like chains binding her to a man capable of such violence. She tried to breathe, but the weight of every staring eye crushed her chest. And in that moment Danielle realized the truth. The man she thought would protect her had become the very source of her deepest wound. Murmurs rose from every corner of the restaurant, sharp and jagged like broken glass cutting through the silence. Some whispered in pity, their eyes softening as they glanced at Danielle's trembling figure, hand pressed to her cheek. Others whispered in disgust, shaking their heads at Jonathan's cruelty, their voices dripping with outrage. And then there were those who did not speak at all but simply lifted their phones, their screens glowing in the dim light as they captured what was never meant to be seen. A CEO, a husband, a man who had just shattered his wife's dignity with a single strike. Jonathan sat back in his chair, his posture oozing arrogance. His chest rose and fell in the calm rhythm of someone who believed he was untouchable. He didn't apologize. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at Danielle as a husband should after a moment of weakness. Instead, his lips curled into a sneer, as though she had deserved every ounce of cruelty he had poured into that slap. The room had turned against him, but Jonathan lived in a world where power often silenced truth. He thought this would be no different. But what Jonathan didn't know, what the entire restaurant hadn't realized yet, was that this wasn't just any dining room. And Danielle wasn't just any woman. Behind the swinging doors of the kitchen, hidden in shadows yet alert to every sound, a man had been watching. He had seen Jonathan's hand rise. He had heard the echo of that slap as though it had struck his own soul, and he had felt his blood ignite into fire. The chef wasn't just a chef. He was Marcus Johnson, Danielle's older brother, a man forged in the fires of war, tempered by discipline, trained to dismantle threats in the darkest corners of the earth. A decorated Navy SEAL whose hands had carried both weapons and comrades, whose eyes had stared down danger and never blinked. To the diners, he was simply the tall, broad-shouldered chef who worked the grill with precision. But to Danielle, he was family, protector, blood. And tonight, the threat wasn't an enemy in a foreign land. It wasn't a terrorist in the shadows or a mission in the dead of night. Tonight, the threat sat comfortably in a black suit and tie, sipping wine after striking the woman carrying his child. Tonight, the threat was Jonathan Parker. Marcus's jaw tightened as he wiped his hands on his apron, his chest heaving as the rage built inside him. Memories of childhood came rushing back. The way he had shielded Danielle when bullies mocked her, the way he had promised their late mother he'd always protect his little sister no matter the cost. He had kept that promise across oceans and battlefield. And now, fate had placed him here, in this very room, at this very moment. The diners may not have known who Marcus was, but they would soon. And Jonathan Parker was about to learn the brutal truth. Some battles aren't fought in war zones, they're fought at dinner tables. Marcus's blood boiled, rage coursing through his veins hotter than the flames that had kissed his skin in battle. The kitchen doors slammed behind him as he tossed his apron aside, the fabric hitting the floor like a war flag discarded before combat. His boots struck the tiled floor with force, each step echoing like a drumbeat of war. Diners turned, their whispers dying instantly as they felt the shift in the air. Something was about to happen. The crowd parted instinctively, their bodies moving aside as if drawn back by an invisible tide. In that moment, Marcus wasn't just a chef stepping into the dining hall. He was a storm breaking loose. His towering frame cut through the silence, broad shoulders squared, his jaw locked tight. His very presence radiated danger, and yet, to Danielle, it radiated hope. He stopped at their table, his shadow falling over Jonathan like a dark warning. His voice dropped low, each word carrying the weight of years spent commanding soldiers, surviving war, and staring death in the eyes. "Get your hands off my sister." The words rolled across the room like thunder. Diners gasped softly, phones trembling in their hands as they recorded the unfolding storm. The atmosphere thickened, as though the restaurant itself was holding its breath. Jonathan's eyes flickered upward, startled by the force of the intrusion. For the first time that evening, his arrogance faltered. His lips parted to speak, but nothing came. His grip on the wine glass loosened slightly, his knuckles paling. He hadn't expected this, hadn't realized the man cooking in the kitchen carried not only the weight of military honor but also the blood of the woman he had just humiliated. Danielle's tear-streaked eyes lifted. Relief flickered through them, fragile but undeniable. At the same time, fear coursed through her body, fear of what her brother might do, fear of what her husband's arrogance might ignite. Her lips trembled as she whispered his name. Marcus. The sound pierced him. It wasn't just his name, it was a call, a plea, a reminder of every promise he had ever made to protect her. He saw her sitting there, 8 months pregnant, her hand still clutching her cheek as if to shield her unborn child from the violence of her husband. He saw her fragility, her shame, her pain. And something inside Marcus broke. This wasn't just his sister. This was a woman betrayed in the most vulnerable moment of her life, betrayed by the very man who had vowed to love and protect her. Marcus's hands curled into fists, his body trembling not with fear but with the battle between discipline and fury. He had been trained to strike with precision, to dismantle enemies quickly, to end threats without hesitation. But this wasn't war. This was family. Jonathan shifted in his seat, attempting to rebuild his mask of arrogance, but it was too late. Every eye in the room had already seen his fear. The CEO who once commanded boardrooms now sat under the shadow of a man who commanded life and death. And in that tense silence, the battle lines were drawn. The CEO tried to puff his chest, to reclaim the power that was slipping through his fingers. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing into slits as though arrogance could shield him from the storm standing over him. "Stay out of this," he hissed, his words sharp but hollow. He wanted control, but control was no longer his to hold. Marcus stepped closer, the floor groaning beneath the weight of his boots. Every step was deliberate, every breath controlled, but his eyes burned with a fury that couldn't be masked. His voice came low and steady, the kind of tone forged in war zones where hesitation meant death. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The words hung heavy in the air, settling into the silence like stones dropped into deep water. The diners felt it, the truth of it. The tension crackled like lightning, snapping through the room in invisible bolts that made the hair on the back of necks rise. People leaned forward in their chairs, unable to look away, their phones raised higher, cameras flashing, recording every second of this unfolding storm. Jonathan's hand twitched. He reached for his wine glass, desperate for something, anything, to steady the shaking in his fingers. But before he could even lift it, Marcus's hand shot forward, fast as a strike. His grip clamped down on the stem, snatching it away as though it were nothing more than paper. And with one flick of his wrist, the glass shattered against the floor. The sound was final, sharp, deadly. Gasps ripped through the crowd again. A woman in the corner clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. A man muttered under his breath, "He's done for." The restaurant, once a place of laughter and elegance, had transformed into a courtroom where Marcus was judge, jury, and executioner. Jonathan recoiled slightly, his facade cracking. He glanced around at the diners, hoping to find an ally, but all he saw were eyes filled with condemnation. He had thought his money and title could shield him, but in this moment, his power was stripped away, naked for all to see. At the table, Danielle trembled. Her hands, frail yet strong in their own right, drifted across her belly as if to shield her unborn child from the violence, from the shame, from the storm that had unfolded. She could feel the room's energy surging around her, anger, pity, justice brewing. Tears welled again, not just from pain but from the overwhelming weight of the moment. Marcus caught her movement out of the corner of his eye. His chest tightened. This wasn't about him, wasn't about pride or anger, it was about her. About the little life she carried. About dignity and justice. His voice cut through the air once more, calm yet razor-sharp. "You think you can break her. But you'll answer for this." And in that instant Jonathan knew, he wasn't facing a brother. He was facing a soldier with nothing left to lose. Restaurant security rushed in, their navy jackets cutting through the crowd. Their steps were quick, but their faces were uncertain. Should they break it up? Should they separate the men? Or should they let justice unfold in its rawest form? For a moment they hovered on the edge, torn between duty and conscience. But by now the choice was already made. Jonathan's face burned crimson, the arrogance that once defined him melting into shame and fear. He tried to speak, his lips parting, a weak protest forming in his throat. But his voice drowned under the sheer weight of Marcus's presence, a presence that filled the room like a force of nature. "You think money makes you untouchable?" Marcus's voice cut through the silence like steel on stone. His tone carried the weight of authority, of a soldier who had seen men with power fall to dust. "Not tonight. Not in front of her. Not in front of me." The words landed heavy, undeniable. They were truth, judgment, and promise all at once. And then, it happened. The silence that had gripped the restaurant broke, not with whispers, but with applause. Diners rose from their chairs, hands clapping together, voices rising in unity. Some shouted words of encouragement, others whistled, their faces lit with justice finally served. For once, cruelty had not been hidden. For once, it had been met with consequence. Danielle sat stunned, her tears still wet against her cheeks. But now they mingled with something new, something fragile, but real. A smile. Not of joy, but of relief. A smile that told the story of a woman whose dignity, ripped away by the cruelty of a husband, had been restored by the unshakable strength of a brother. Her hand lingered on her cheek, tender over the sting, but her eyes held gratitude as they found Marcus standing tall beside her. Jonathan sputtered, his words tangled, his authority gone. Security closed in, each step sealing his fate. He tried to resist, pulling his arm back, but the crowd's eyes and phones were unforgiving. There was no escape, no silence to hide in, no shadow to cloak his shame. With every camera flashing, every diner recording, his empire of arrogance crumbled in front of the world. The guard seized his arms and pulled him from the chair. He stumbled, red-faced and sweating, his expensive suit suddenly looking more like shackles than armor. The applause followed him as he was dragged toward the door, his humiliation recorded, shared, immortalized. Jonathan Parker, the untouchable CEO, was escorted out not as a man of power, but as a man exposed. Danielle exhaled shakily, her body trembling with both exhaustion and relief. She turned her eyes to Marcus. He stood firm, shoulders broad, eyes softened now as they met hers. In him, she saw not just a brother, but a protector, a shield against a world that had turned cruel. The cameras kept flashing, capturing the moment, sealing it into memory. And as the applause carried into the night air, one truth rang clear and undeniable. Money could buy power, but it could never silence justice. And that night, in a coastal kitchen filled with whispers, one slap didn't just silence a room, it awakened the truth. A truth that no amount of money, power, or arrogance could bury. If you believe no woman should ever endure humiliation, drop a red heart in the comments. And don't forget, like this video, subscribe, and share this story, because the world needs to hear it and your voice helps carry it further.